The pressure doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. The commerce inquiry request moves through internal lanes, slower than Trump expects, not blocked outright, just nudged into procedure. That delay alone is enough to irritate him because it denies the spectacle he was counting on. Inside Washington, aides soften their language. Emails lose urgency. Calendars stay unconfirmed. The investigation exists on paper but not in motion, and that gap starts to matter. Trump lashes out publicly anyway, bluffing certainty, while the machinery underneath him drifts out of sync. Ottawa notices the drift immediately. Mark Carney doesn't respond with a statement or a warning. Instead, coordination tightens elsewhere. Legal teams cross-check subsidy exposure. Trade files once considered dormant are quietly reactivated. Nothing bears his name, but the alignment becomes unmistakable. Dominic LeBlanc's role sharpens without fanfare. Meetings happen that don't appear on public schedules. Language is stripped of emotion. The tone is procedural, almost boring, which only makes it more dangerous. This is not retaliation yet. It's preparation that assumes escalation is inevitable. Meanwhile, the businesses Trump expected to rally behind him start hedging. Compliance officers ask new questions. Contracts are reread. Decisions are postponed, not canceled, just enough to create doubt. No one says Trump is wrong. They simply stop acting as if he's right. Trump senses it. The noise he creates doesn't echo the way it used to. His demand hangs there, exposed, waiting for momentum that never quite arrives. The harder he pushes, the more performative it feels, and the more his authority looks borrowed rather than owned. Nothing has exploded yet, but nothing moves the way it used to. The pressure doesn't arrive as a headline or a formal clash. It seeps in sideways. Trump's demand for a commerce-led subsidy investigation enters the system loudly, but it doesn't travel fast. It slows as it moves. Not rejected, not approved, just absorbed into procedure where urgency dies quietly. Inside Washington, the tone changes before the paperwork does. Staffers stop using verbs that imply certainty. Emails that once demanded action now ask for clarification. Drafts circulate without deadlines. The investigation technically exists, but it doesn't acquire weight, and Trump feels that absence more sharply than open resistance. He reacts the only way he knows how. Louder language, sharper threats, public insistence that the inquiry is inevitable. But the words don't accelerate anything. They just underline how little control he has over the machinery he's trying to intimidate. Ottawa watches this unravel without intervening. Mark Carney doesn't counter the threat because countering would legitimize it. Instead, alignment happens elsewhere. Legal reviews that had been routine are reclassified. Trade exposure models are reopened. Scenarios once considered theoretical are treated as actionable, not announced, just prepared. Dominic LeBlanc's office moves with deliberate dullness. Meetings are framed as technical. Notes are stripped of adjectives. The work becomes invisible by design. This isn't retaliation yet. It's calibration, and it assumes Trump will overreach again. The ripple reaches corporate corridors faster than public debate. Compliance teams start flagging uncertainty. Executives ask whether contracts tied to U.S. subsidies could become liabilities overnight. No one withdraws publicly. They simply pause. And those pauses stack. Trump notices the hesitation but misreads it. He assumes fear means leverage. In reality, it means distance. The people he expected to line up behind his demand begin repositioning quietly, creating options that don't depend on him. The investigation request still sits there unresolved. Its power decays by the hour, not because it's invalid, but because Trump forced it too early before anyone was ready to follow his lead. Nothing breaks. No announcement lands. No retaliation is declared. Yet behavior shifts across institutions that once moved in Trump's rhythm. His pressure remains visible. His influence does not. Nothing has exploded yet, but nothing moves the way it used to. Trump doesn't wait for confirmation. He never does. The moment the commerce inquiry fails to gain visible traction, he escalates rhetorically, mistaking volume for momentum. The language sharpens, the tone grows impatient, and the insistence becomes almost frantic. What he calls decisive action begins to sound like improvisation under stress. Inside the system, that shift is noticed immediately. Not reacted to, not challenged, just logged. The more Trump pushes, the more his request is treated as a political artifact rather than a regulatory one. Staffers who once tried to interpret intent now focus on shielding process. The investigation remains technically alive, but its procedural weight thins, diluted by internal caution Trump can't see. Mark Carney exploits that gap without stepping into it. He doesn't speak to Trump's accusations, and he doesn't rebut the premise. Instead, Canada's posture hardens in places Trump isn't watching. Trade documentation that once moved on trust now demands precision. Reviews slow, not enough to be hostile, just enough to signal that assumptions are no longer shared. Dominic LeBlanc reinforces the shift by narrowing channels, fewer informal contacts, more written exchanges, language that leaves less room for reinterpretation later. It's subtle, but it forces American counterparts to commit positions they were hoping to keep flexible. Each clarification locks something in place, and Trump's room to maneuver shrinks without him realizing why. The first signs of strain show up among Trump's supposed allies. Companies that benefit from U.S. subsidies start to worry about exposure, not the loss of money, but the risk of being singled out if Canada responds selectively. Lawyers ask whether silence is safer than advocacy. Executives stop volunteering public support. The coalition Trump assumed was automatic begins to fracture quietly. Trump senses the hesitation and lashes out again, framing resistance as betrayal. But the accusation lands flat. No one argues back. They simply disengage. Meetings are postponed, calls are rerouted. The absence of confrontation deprives Trump of an enemy he can rally against, leaving only his own escalation echoing in the open. Behind closed doors, Ottawa's preparation advances another step. Retaliation scenarios are refined, not announced. Each option is designed to be narrow, legal, and asymmetric. The goal isn't spectacle. It's choice architecture, forcing Trump's allies to calculate costs individually rather than collectively. Trump tries to regain initiative by signaling speed, hinting that commerce will move regardless of hesitation, but speed without coordination creates new problems. The faster he pushes, the more exposed the investigation looks, and the harder it becomes for institutions to pretend it's routine. By now, the imbalance is clear to everyone except Trump. He is acting. Others are deciding. The inquiry that was supposed to demonstrate strength begins to function as a liability, pulling attention to the fragility of his authority rather than its reach. The system doesn't confront him head-on. It absorbs him, slows him, and forces him to react to consequences he didn't plan for. Each move he makes narrows his options further, even as he insists he's in control. Nothing has resolved. Nothing has concluded. But the pressure has changed hands, and Trump is no longer setting the pace. Trump doesn't wait for the system to respond. He never does. As soon as the commerce inquiry fails to generate visible momentum, he shifts tone, pushing harder, faster, and louder. What was framed as enforcement begins to resemble compulsion. The urgency in his language isn't strategic, it's anxious. Inside the machinery, he's trying to dominate that anxiety, registers immediately. The inquiry is no longer treated as a neutral regulatory process. It's flagged internally as politically sensitive, which quietly changes everything. Review chains lengthen. Sign-offs multiply. The burden of justification moves away from those slowing the process and toward those trying to accelerate it. Trump keeps escalating anyway. He insists the investigation is imminent. He signals impatience with delays. He pretends not to notice. But the more he pressures, the more the system treats his request as something to be contained rather than executed. His authority becomes procedural friction. Mark Carney recognizes the shift without acknowledging it publicly. He doesn't respond to Trump's rhetoric because responding would imply symmetry. Instead, Canada's posture changes where it counts. Internal trade assessments stop assuming goodwill. Exposure maps are revised with a different baseline volatility, not cooperation. Those adjustments don't trigger headlines. They trigger behavior. Canadian officials begin asking narrower questions. Requests for clarification become more frequent. Informal assurances lose their usefulness. Each interaction forces American counterparts to be more explicit than they planned, committing positions that can later be leveraged. Dominic LeBlanc deepens that constraint by formalizing communication. Channels that once relied on personal rapport are replaced with documentation. Tone becomes neutral to the point of chill. The effect is cumulative. What used to move on trust now moves on record, and record keeping is where Trump's pressure tactics lose potency. The first cracks appear among Trump's assumed allies. Companies that benefit from U.S. subsidies start reassessing risk, not because Canada has acted, but because Canada hasn't. The silence is unnerving. Legal teams begin modeling selective retaliation scenarios. Boards ask what happens if their firm is chosen quietly, precisely, and lawfully. No one defects publicly. That would attract attention. Instead, support evaporates in private. Statements are delayed. Lobbying efforts soften. Participation becomes conditional. Trump's coalition doesn't collapse. It thins, which is worse. Trump senses the thinning but misreads it as leverage waiting to be applied. He lashes out, again framing hesitation as disloyalty. The accusation lands without effect. No one argues. No one reassures him either. The absence of response deprives Trump of feedback, leaving him escalating into a vacuum. Behind closed doors, Ottawa advances from preparation to sequencing. Retaliatory options are no longer theoretical. They are ordered. Each is designed to be defensible, targeted, and deniable. The objective isn't retaliation as spectacle. It's retaliation as sorting mechanism, forcing U.S. stakeholders to calculate exposure individually. That design choice matters. It means Trump's pressure doesn't unify opposition against Canada. It fractures it. Each affected party is left alone to weigh loyalty against cost, and loyalty looks expensive when the risk is personalized. Trump tries to reclaim initiative by signaling speed. He hints that commerce will move regardless of internal caution, but speed without consensus creates a new problem. The investigation begins to look rushed, and rushed investigations invite scrutiny. The faster Trump pushes, the more fragile the process appears. Institutional actors respond by protecting themselves. More memos, more caveats, more distance. The inquiry still exists, but it no longer carries inevitability. It carries risk, and risk is contagious. By this point, the imbalance is obvious to everyone except Trump. He is expending energy, others are conserving it. He is reacting to resistance he can't see clearly, while Ottawa is shaping conditions he hasn't noticed yet. Nothing has concluded, no action has been announced, but the terrain has changed. Trump is no longer forcing movement. He is provoking alignment against him quietly, methodically, and without giving him a clean target to attack. The investigation was meant to corner Canada. Instead, it has begun to corner Trump inside his own urgency. That choice alone changes the balance. Trump still believes he's pressuring Canada. In reality, he's being observed, measured, and allowed to continue exposing himself. Carney's decision is not to retaliate immediately, but to let Trump commit further, locking himself into positions that will later constrain him. The immediate consequence is subtle but sharp. Canadian trade officials begin signaling compliance reviews tied to specific subsidy-linked categories. Nothing broad, nothing dramatic, just enough to force American firms to ask whether they might fall into a gray zone. The uncertainty is intentional. It doesn't punish yet. It unsettles. That triggers the second decision, this time among Trump's supposed allies. Companies that had quietly welcomed the commerce investigation now face a calculation they didn't expect. Support Trump publicly and risk being flagged selectively, or retreat into procedural neutrality and hope not to be noticed. Several choose distance. This isn't announced. It shows up as absence. Calls go unanswered. Statements are delayed. Participation in joint lobbying efforts quietly thins. Trump loses something here that doesn't show up on paper-coordinated backing. The coalition he assumed would amplify his pressure begins to dissolve into individual risk management. Trump reacts badly. He pushes commerce harder, demanding acceleration. That pressure forces internal actors into their own decision. Do they comply and risk owning a politically tainted investigation, or do they slow further and absorb Trump's anger? The choice is obvious to anyone thinking long term. The investigation enters a procedural choke point. Requests for additional documentation multiply, scope questions expand. The process doesn't stop, but it becomes heavier, slower, and more defensible. Trump loses time, and with it, narrative control. The inquiry no longer looks like decisive action. It looks contested. Ottawa notices immediately. Dominic LeBlanc moves to the next phase, authorizing targeted engagement with sectors most exposed to U.S. subsidies. The message is careful and indirect. Canada is reviewing alignment. Firms are advised to ensure compliance readiness. No threats, just reminders. That creates the third decision point. U.S. industry groups now have to choose whether to lobby Trump to escalate further or quietly urge restraint to avoid becoming collateral. Several choose the latter. Not publicly, internally. Trump isn't told directly. He finds out through resistance. Meetings become tense. The enthusiasm he expected isn't there. Questions replace assurances. Trump's response is predictable. He lashes out, framing hesitation as weakness, accusing institutions and businesses of undermining him. But the accusations don't reverse the behavior. They harden it. The fourth decision emerges at the institutional level. With Trump's rhetoric growing more erratic, legal counsel within Commerce pushes for additional safeguards. Every step must now be justified, documented, and insulated. The investigation's timeline stretches again. Trump loses another asset, speed. Meanwhile, Ottawa advances its selective retaliation framework another notch. The focus narrows further. The goal isn't maximum pain, it's maximum leverage with minimum visibility. Each potential action is designed to be defensible under existing trade rules, making escalation legally unattractive for Washington. That design forces yet another choice on Trump's allies. If Canada acts narrowly, any counter-response would require Trump to explain why he's escalating against measures that appear compliant. That explanation would land poorly, especially among industries already nervous. Some choose to disengage entirely. Others quietly signal willingness to accommodate Canada rather than fight Washington's battle. Trump loses something here that's harder to recover than time trust. Not public trust, but operational trust. From actors who once assumed alignment, Trump senses the erosion but misdiagnoses it. He interprets restraint as an invitation to push harder. He hints at expanding the investigation's scope, escalating rhetorically to reclaim dominance. But the threat backfires. It alarms institutions already wary of being dragged into a political stunt. The fifth decision point crystallizes when Ottawa quietly finalizes a shortlist. Not announced, not published, just a sequence of potential measures ready to be activated if Trump crosses another line. The existence of that list changes behavior without being used. Word spreads selectively, enough to be felt. Companies begin self-regulating exposure. Supply chain decisions adjust. Contracts are reconsidered. Trump's pressure has triggered a defensive realignment that bypasses him entirely. At this stage, Trump's options narrow dramatically, escalate and risk triggering Canada's selective response, alienating allies further, pause and appear weak. Either way, he loses control of the tempo. The initiative has shifted. He tries to reclaim it by projecting confidence, insisting the investigation will conclude swiftly. But the system no longer responds to his insistence. It responds to risk assessments shaped by Ottawa's quiet preparation. By the end of this phase, nothing explosive has happened. No tariffs announced, no sanctions declared, yet Trump is boxed in. He has lost time, coalition, cohesion, procedural dominance, and narrative momentum, all without Canada firing a visible shot. The investigation that was meant to intimidate has become a liability that exposes Trump's isolation. And the more he struggles against it, the clearer that isolation becomes. The system doesn't close in on Trump with a single blow. It tightens slowly through rules he once dismissed as obstacles meant for weaker players. What began as an aggressive push for a subsidy investigation now hardens into something else entirely, a web of institutional consequences Trump can no longer unravel without paying a visible price. The first constraint becomes unavoidable inside the commerce process itself. With every safeguard added, the investigation acquires a legal weight Trump never intended. Internal reviews treat it less as an enforcement tool and more as a potential liability. The focus shifts from speed to defensibility. Trump loses the ability to accelerate without exposing himself to procedural challenge. That shift touches real lives almost immediately. A mid-sized manufacturer tied to U.S. subsidies delays an expansion decision not because Canada has acted, but because uncertainty now carries cost. Hiring freezes quietly replace growth plans. Executives don't blame Canada. They blame unpredictability. Trump's pressure has turned policy into noise, and noise is expensive. Ottawa doesn't announce retaliation. It doesn't need to. The mere readiness of selective measures alters behavior across the supply chain. Compliance departments expand their scope. Contracts are rewritten with contingency clauses. What was once theoretical risk becomes operational planning. Trump's leverage evaporates as actors prepare to function without his assurances. The second institutional boundary emerges through precedent. Once Commerce treats a politically driven investigation as high-risk, future administrations inherit that caution. Trump's attempt to weaponize the process plants a seed that limits not just him, but anyone who tries the same tactic. His short-term aggression creates a long-term brake on executive overreach. That brake reaches into politics. Lawmakers who once tolerated Trump's bluster begin distancing themselves from the mechanism he activated, not publicly condemning it, but refusing to defend it. Silence replaces support. Trump loses another asset, plausible deniability, that this is routine governance rather than personal vendetta. The human cost deepens quietly. Workers don't see headlines about retaliation. They see postponed orders. Suppliers notice rerouted shipments. None of this is catastrophic, but it accumulates. Each small disruption reinforces the perception that Trump's trade posture creates instability without payoff. Inside Trump's own orbit, the mood changes. Advisors become cautious. Language shifts from certainty to conditionality. The confidence Trump projects externally isn't mirrored internally. Meetings end without decisions. Trump's circle starts managing around him rather than through him. Ottawa's role in this phase remains almost invisible. Mark Carney doesn't escalate. He lets the system do the work. Canada's restraint becomes its strength. By staying within legal bounds, Ottawa ensures that any U.S. escalation would appear disproportionate, shifting reputational risk squarely onto Trump. Dominic LeBlanc's contribution is procedural, not dramatic. By ensuring every potential response is anchored in existing frameworks, he removes Trump's favorite escape route, claiming unfair treatment. If Canada acts, it will look boring. And boring is devastating to Trump's narrative. The third layer of consequence settles into institutional memory. Businesses learn that Trump's threats are loud but unreliable. They adjust accordingly. Investment flows seek predictability elsewhere. Trump's trade posture begins to function as a warning sign rather than an incentive. At this stage, Trump faces a trap of his own making. If he retreats, he confirms weakness. If he escalates, he triggers responses designed to be legally defensible and politically isolating. The choice set narrows to damage control, not dominance. The system doesn't announce its verdict, it enforces it through behavior. Trump's investigation continues, but stripped of menace. Canada's readiness remains, but unused. The imbalance is complete. Trump is stuck reacting to structures he once thought he could bend. What endures after this episode isn't a policy win or a trade shift. It's a precedent. Institutions learn how to absorb Trump without confronting him. Allies learn how to disengage without defecting. Opponents learn how to wait him out. And Trump learns something far more dangerous to his political survival than open defeat. He learns that when he forces a crisis inside the system no longer breaks for him. It adjusts around him and leaves him isolated at the center.